Alright, we have everybody muted. And, gentlemen, it's time for the Carnival of Lights. It's been years since I left my hometown, and I don't think I'll ever return. I do miss the timeless idyll of the country, the sultry, gently undulating hills, and the cool, quiet sanctuary of the woods. I can still picture the night sky in my mind's eye, the endless black canvas speckled with glittering stars, so vivid and clear they seemed within easy reach of your hand. Even now, the remembrance of the lonesome, poignant howls that would sometimes emerge at night from within the darkness stirs within me a deep desire to return, but I have sworn never to step foot within that cursed town again. Not after what happened. Traveling circuses or carnivals are a common sight if you live in a town like mine. Too small to warrant a permanent establishment of its own, but too big to pass up as a business opportunity, especially in the summer months. Large, colorful banners in the town center, usually put up by weeks in advance, would herald the coming of new attractions. Smaller black and white posters, sometimes so poorly photocopied that you could barely make out the words, much less the images, festoon the streets, a constant reminder that fun and laughter would soon grace the prosaic place we called home. To be honest, I think the adults were often just as excited as the kids. Living in a small town had its perks, but having interesting preoccupations isn't usually one of them. Most of the town folk were poorly educated farmers, fortunate enough to inherit a piece of fertile farmland from their forebears. Life was a constant drudgery of chores and backbreaking labor, with little in the way of entertainment. The television had only a handful of channels, and with only one social event that happened with any regularity, being the church every Sunday. The pub enjoyed a booming business, though. And so we all rubbed our hands in glee when one late spring morning we awoke to see workmen putting up a giant cloth banner that screamed in crimson letters, "The Carnival of Lights awaits you." My family owned a small shop in the town center selling provisions, and we lived in the quarters directly above, so we were among the first to witness the thrilling sight. Word spread, and soon some of the workmen were accosted by eager teenagers wanting to find out more about the carnival. You see, the roving fun fairs that had visited in the past were well-known operate. Not big time perhaps, but names were not unfamiliar. But no one had heard of the Carnival of Lights. There you go. What the workers could tell us was that they had been contracted by some company in a nearby city, a company themselves were working for the first time, and no, they weren't told exactly when the carnival would be setting up in our town. The air of mystery about the whole affair only heightened our anticipation. We found ourselves that it had to be a new entrant to the carnival scene, a hitherto unheard player making its debut. Possibly from the continent, a few of the older folks ventured, nodding sagely. The words debut and the continent were incomprehensible to us kids, but the exoticism they connotated and promised was not lost on us. There were quite a few quiet utterances of skepticism among the adults as to why any newcomer would choose, of all places, this humble backwater, but they were soon shushed with indignant admonitions to not rain on the town's parade. The days lengthened and summer drifted in like a warm breeze, bringing with it the joyous cries of children freed from the shackles of school. Impatient for the carnival to arrive, my friends and I would sprint every morning to the open field near the outskirts, where any fun fair, circus, or carnival would customarily set up shop. Disappointment met us each day until one morning a marvelous scene greeted us. They must have started during the night, for the frames of all the rides could be seen peeking through the scaffolding that enveloped them. The whole place was a hive of activity, and before our awestruck eyes, we saw the carnival slowly take form. There was a roller coaster, the biggest we had ever seen, and in our hearts we immediately knew where we'd be making our first stop once the gates opened. As we ran, madly whooping at the top of our lungs back to town, a different banner awaited our goggling eyes. "Open tonight," it triumphantly declared, and we high-fived one another, drunk with happiness. The rest of the day seemed to drag on interminably, so much so that by the late afternoon we were unceremoniously booted from our homes on account of our incessant whining, our pockets jingling with coins, for our harried parents had gladly parted with in order to buy them some peace and quiet. We reached our destination well before dusk had fallen, but already a thick, bustling crowd was thronging the unopened entrance. "Oh man," complained my friend Henry, a tall, spindly boy whom puberty had caught early and rather awkwardly. "Well, perhaps they'll have VIP tickets for sale," he said, jingling his bulging pockets, which were clearly fuller than any of ours. His father owned the pub, which meant that he was always the one with the new bike or shoes, but not the modesty to refrain from rubbing it in our faces. Still, he was not ungenerous when it came to sharing, possibly the sole reason we grudgingly accepted him as one of the gang, though there were many times I felt like kicking him in the shin. Of the three, I considered Gregory my best friend. He was a rather quiet boy, unwilling to proffer any view unless pressed, though often his remarks turned out to be the most intelligent of the lot. Having never fully shed his baby fat from his face and body, he was a frequent target of snide remarks from the rest of the class. No one ever laid a finger on him, though. James, the brash leader of our little quartet with outsized arms, saw to that. As twilight fell, it soon became apparent why the carnival had been so named. Lanterns, hundreds and hundreds of them, each giving off a lurid red, came to life with the dying of the day. The scarlet spots of light did little to brighten up the area, instead casting a bloody sheen on every angle they caught. "Fantastic!" cried Henry appreciatively, clapping enthusiastically. A murmur of approval rustled through the crowd, which had fallen silent at the arresting sight. "Looks kinda creepy," squeaked Greg as he slided up to me, trying not to let Henry near him. I didn't know it was supposed to look horror-themed. I didn't either. A certain repulsion had risen within me, driving out all of the earlier excitement. If it had just been Greg and I, we surely would have turned and walked around and left, but some of Henry's enthusiasm seemed to have spilt over to James. "Come on, guys." I felt his strong arms pushing me into the surging crowd. The gates had opened. If we don't hurry, there'll be a line at the roller coaster for sure. Herded in like a pair of clueless calves, Greg and I glanced around wildly at our surroundings. Loud music, somewhat cheerfully discordant, blared from the speakers. It was difficult to see where we were going, for the shadows clung on stubbornly to every corner like cobwebs. It was a horror theme park, all right. The staff all wore white, expressionless masks, the kind that evokes visceral, unexplained discomfort from the pits of your psyche. Blood-splattered signs promised horrifying experiences. The boat ride to nowhere, the silent hall of mirrors, etc. All cliched stuff. "There, the guillotine coaster." Henry jabbed a finger in excitement at a sign composed of letters with wickedly jagged edges. Without turning to see if we were following, he dashed off in the direction the sign pointed. We stumbled behind him reluctantly, practically being pulled along by an eager James, who had an iron grip on our wrists. As expected, there was already a long queue ahead of us. Mr. Moneybags craned his neck to see if there was an express line for those who were willing to pay for a VIP ticket, only to settle back down with his crestfallen frown on his face. As the queue crawled along, the two ebullient boys each expertly gave his prediction on how stomach-churning the ride was going to be, based on what they could observe of the tracks where they stood. My buddy and I could only exchange glum glances as the air was punctuated with screams every now and then, screams that sounded way more terrified than exhilarated. We both loved roller coaster rides, but the eerie atmosphere of the park had diminished our appetite. As our turn drew closer, a safety warning came into view. "Attention, you must be this tall to die." A bloody red gash on the sign marked the minimum height required to take the ride. We stared at it, mouths agape. None of us had seen such a sign before. You must remember that this took place decades ago, back when common sense was thought to be a lot more common, and safety regulations existed only for the most dangerous of activities. I was suddenly aware of the looks my friends were giving me. I had always known myself to be the shortest among my friends, and even when I took roller coaster rides previously, my head barely poked out through the harness, but I never thought that would be a problem. I ran towards the sign, refusing to believe it. The closer I came, the further the bloody red line floated up defiantly. At last, the truth was staring me in the face. I was too short to ride. It's strange how human psychology works. The moment something is off limits, it instantly becomes desirable. All the dread and reluctance I had harbored toward the ride vanished the moment I realized I wouldn't be allowed to ride it. "Hide me," I begged my friends, elbowing my way into the middle of our group. Greg stared at me in surprise. I can stay here with you if you don't want to wait alone. His plump face shone at me hopefully. I shook my head vigorously. No way, I'm coming along. Ignoring his obvious chagrin, I shuffled my feet to maintain my inconspicuous, or so I hoped, position between my friends as the queue hustled forward. The roller coaster was back, its seats empty. What? Cried Henry in surprise. Where's the passengers? The employee at the turnstile turned toward us, his eyes looking oddly alive behind the stiff white mask. You alight on the other side, he informed us gruffly, pointing to the further end of the ride where the tracks disappeared ominously into a dark cavern. I wanted to kick the big mouth hard. He just had to draw attention to us. No, me. Keeping my head down, fingers crossed, I tried to scurry across the turnstile as inconspicuously as possible. With my back foot nearly crossing the threshold, the hallelujahs were already on the tip of my tongue before I heard, "Hold it," yelled behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin as the behemoth of a voice struck my ears like a sledgehammer. Mr. Gruff White Mask had my shoulder in a painful, vice-like grip. "You're too short to go on the ride, pal," he growled, sounding anything but pally. "Come on, mister," I pleaded. "I've sat on plenty of roller coasters before. I'll be okay." I met his flinty gaze beseechingly, hoping his hard brown eyes would soften. "Out," the verdict announced. The unsympathetic carnival goers behind me began prodding me aside with sharp elbows, heedless of the gross injustice that had befallen me. Dejected, I looked on sadly as my friends scrambled for the best seats. Well, Henry and James did anyway. Greg wandered around like a lost child before reluctantly sitting himself down beside a fat, sweaty dude who was also alone. As the machinery hummed and creaked, as the cars began to inch forward, he threw me a look of desolation, tinged with fear, as if he were a ghost fresh on his way to Hades. As it turned out, that was the last time I ever saw them alive. The roller coaster disappeared with a loud whoosh. Remembering what the turnstile employee had said about the ride ending on the other side, I left the boarding platform and trudged along the side of the tracks to the grassy field. Strident screaming followed with the low rumble of wheels on tracks would greet my ears every time before the screeching train of terror and its captive passengers hurtled past me for yet another round. Torn between relief and petulant anger at being left out, I kicked up divots of dirt as I made my way towards the gaping cavern at the far end. Something about the large, maw-like opening stirred a deep sense of unease with me, though especially the way it seemed to swallow up the screaming humans each time they plummeted helplessly into its inky void. Nearing my destination, I stopped to observe the roller coaster looming towards me, seemingly slowing, as it began to make its steep ascent that preceded the plunge into the waiting jaws of the man-made grotto. The hullabaloo had somewhat subsided, no doubt because the hoarse throats on board were taking a much-needed rest. I gasped. As the first car crested the peak, the hollow of the cavern came alight with a red, hungry glow. The riders must have seen it too, for the hollering, almost appreciative, returned in a sharp crescendo. I felt a desperate, despairing horror grip my heart. Something felt distinctly wrong. Without knowing why, I started sprinting. The train, nearing full throttle now, was streaking further and further away. That was when I heard it. The screams turned up several pitches, now possessing a tenor of genuine fear. Silence. A deep, empty silence. My lungs nearly bursting, I raced towards the cave, which was still awash in the eerie red glow that I would never forget for as long as I live. Bedazzled by my sudden dive into the light, I squinted around in confusion. Passengers were still sitting, locked in their seats, mute and frozen. The ground was strewn with balloons, or so I thought. What a weird way to end a ride was the only thought my dazed mind could sputter out. A sudden movement behind the stationary roller coaster caught my eye. A plank of some sort was being lifted up towards the roof. I rubbed my eyes, urging the stars in my eyes to go away. No, not a plank. Far thinner and sharper. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the light, that sickening realization ripped through my shuddering body. It was a blade. A monstrous, 3-yard-long blade that had passed through each sobbing, throbbing throat like a hot knife through butter. I turned and ran. All sense had been shot clean from my head, leaving only a primal fear that powered my legs beyond the endurance and consciousness. The darkness, the very next, I was out like a light. They had assumed I was dead, one of the many to have been senselessly slaughtered in the accursed carnival, until they found me bordering the woods. I was told that it was the work of some demented cult, seeking to sacrifice as many as they could before they did themselves in. I never got round to hearing the details though, mainly because my mouth would widen into a scream anytime someone spoke of it. It's been years and years since, and I've been through countless therapists to little effect. Even now, I hardly make it through a night without recalling the blood-red scene in the cavern, and worst of all, the embodiable sign that had ironically saved my life. Attention, you must be this tall to die.